What is the hardest thing have you done in your professional career? Anybody wants to have a go? What is the hardest thing that you had to do? Learn a new language? Anyone has done that? Or some of you might have switched from being like a QA engineer to a developer, or from a developer to a SRE, or from a developer to a manager. So these are all things that we are constantly doing in our careers as we learn. Some of the things are easy for us. We are able to naturally grasp it. We might have the background to do that. But other times you might be faced with the daunting prospect of taking on something that you are absolutely not qualified. You don't even know whether you can do it, right? So how do you approach such a endeavor, right? That's going to be my talk. I'm going to talk from my experience. This will not be a sales pitch for my product. I'll give you just enough so that you can follow the journey. But what I'm talking about can be applied to, like, as I said, different aspects of your professional life, right? Quick introduction. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Typesense. I'm happy to say that I began my career right out of college in Thoughtworks. I worked only for 2 years, but I think I got a lot of things. I learned a lot of things, and it has really impacted the way I have approached software engineering. So after that, I worked in a couple of other companies, and one common theme that I kept coming across, right, was with search. So if you look at software engineering, you have databases, which is a well-solved problem. You have the NoSQLs, which are more recent, and then the standard SQL databases. It's a well-understood problem. You have the SQL standard. You can, you know what to do, right? You have ORMs. It's a very well-mature market. But with search engines, it was not that case, at least when I started off in 2014, 2015, right? There were a couple of search engines. There was Solar, there was Elasticsearch. I'm sure you might have worked with one of those. But neither of them were like really something that were really usable, and they had very steep learning curves, right? And I felt like, I kept running into projects in my previous companies where I felt like, hey, this is just too hard, especially when you're working with something like a database, which is very well tried, trusted. You have like set of, you know how to like manage it. And then you have to make some parts of your database searchable, and databases don't do a good job of allowing you to do that. So you use an external system like Elasticsearch or Solar. And I always felt like, it was a bit difficult to like get going with it. I'll talk about some of the specifics. So I started a company, which is basically Typesense, which is a lightning fast open source search engine. If you're already familiar with Elasticsearch, you can think of it as easier to use alternative to Elasticsearch for like let's say a specific set of use cases, which I will talk about. So when I mean by easy to use, we aim for like 10x ease of use in terms of like developer productivity, in terms of maintenance, in terms of performance, and so on, right? Typesense is 100% open source. It's on GitHub. But we also have a Typesense Cloud, which is a hosted offering, and that's how we monetize our open source. How we fund the open source work, right? And we are doing about 1.5 billion searches. We deploy on 80 regions, 80 data centers around the world. So this was me, circa 2015, the state of search. As I said, right, there were like a couple of open source search providers. They were like Elasticsearch, I think was about 4 or 5 years old then. There were like a few enterprise search options, but it was very daunting. The learning curve, as I said, was like really steep, and creating like simple applications. And I felt like these were all targeted towards very large database. Somebody said about managing 30 terabytes, 50 terabytes, and so on, right? But 90% of the world is not, you could say either they are fortunate or not fortunate, depending on how you look at it, but 90% of the world lives on small size to medium sized data, right? They don't really have terabytes to data to search on. But what's important is, how do you make that data searchable in an interactive fashion in your app, right? Let's say you're using an e-commerce app, or you're using like your SaaS app where you need to make like your email addresses or contacts searchable on your phone with autocomplete and so on. So implementing such an experience was really, really difficult, right? Because there was there were plugins and stuff like that, but nothing really worked out of the wood. So I kept thinking, there must be a better way to do this. And one of the problems with all the search technologies back then was I'm not going to diss on any of them. Elasticsearch is a fabulous tool. It's a fantastically versatile product. But the versatility is what it's the greatest disadvantage also, right? Because you can now do so many things with it. You can do log aggregation, you can do metric aggregation, you can do analytics, you can do reporting. You can pretty much do it as a very expressive query language. You can do a lot of things with it. But all that versatility also comes with a cost, right? The cost of getting started, the learning curve, and going to market, and managing it in production, and all that comes into the picture, right? So my thought process was like, can I come up with can I build a search engine that was hyper focused on app search? So what do I mean by app search? So you have like in your e-commerce, you're searching for cell phones, and in your, let's say your mobile app, you're searching for some entries, and these are all like standard patterns. I'm sure in every single app that you develop, you will run into this search bar. You will have to power that somehow. And search is not just like if you throw some text and you just find information, right? You also will have this filtering, your ability to filter, your ability to do counts next to the categories and so on. So search is not just text search, but it also has like filtering, sorting, aggregating, and this kind of thing. But to build these kind of interfaces, I kept running into problems when I used these open source search solutions that were available. So I wanted to go out and build that search engine, right? But whenever you dream something, sometimes you need to like put your foot on the ground and get some reality check also, because building a search engine is not a trivial matter, right? So you're essentially building a database engine. And what do we have in a database? You will have data structures of all kinds. Typesense, over the last 7 years, I think we have 3 different implementations of try, a couple of implementations of heap, 2 or 3 implementations of linked list. You have to do it. You can't really always borrow from the standard library because you are building a database. You're not building an application, because you have to be as low to the hardware as possible for you to give the most optimized experience. So, and you also need to think about distributed systems. How am I going to, because you can't have a single point of failure, so you need to have some form of clustering. How do I have high availability? And so you have to start thinking about the CAP theory and so on. So you need to know distributed systems. You need to know query processing and planning. Somebody gives you a search query, search for Apple, where the price is less than $1,000 in these categories. So somebody gives you an expressive query like this. When I have when I have established my professional path, I have some money in my bank, I can take a couple of years away from work and kind of build this vision out, right? That's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is, let me start working on it. Let's see how it goes, right? Because it's an open source software, my employers didn't have a problem with me working on it in my free time, as long as it didn't interfere with their core thing. So I decided to take the second approach, right? So I came up with one very simple rule, right? I shall write some code every day. That's it. I didn't want to have like the way you will typically approach a large project. Okay, break it down into milestones. The next 3 months, I'm going to do this. Next 6 months, I'm going to do this. In a year, I want to do this, right? I didn't want to do any of that, right? I just said, okay, let me just write some code every day. And since it's also a very experimental project, because, and as I said, I didn't really have much of the background to do this. So it started off as a research kind of thing, let me just write some code, right? And I started, this is my first commit into the GitHub repository. You can see that it's at 7:45 p.m. On a night. I use this screenshot for a number of reasons. One, I talk about the fact that, much of my first 4 years working on Typesense was all like nights and weekends. I don't have that graph. There's another graph, and I plotted the time of commit against like the time of the day. Like you will find 90% will be like either like 6 a.m. in the morning or after like 7 p.m. in the evening, because I still gave 100% at my work, right? And I gave 100% to my family, and whatever time left, I had to maybe like sleep 1 hour less, or like, skip on that movie that I wanted to watch or the book I wanted to read. So basically spend that, spend it on this project. And so what kind of time are we looking at? So let's say I spend an hour roughly a day, so maybe 5 days a week, so you have 1 hour each. Then maybe weekends I spend like 2 to 3 hours, so we're looking at something like 10 to 11 hours. And if you look at a 40-hour work week is the standard thing, right? I don't think the four-day work week has caught up yet, right? So many of us still work 5 days a week, 8 into 5, 40 hours. So you're looking something like 20% of your work week, you can spend on the project that you want to work on. Doesn't seem too bad, but this is my commit. Somebody called this a shallow metric in the previous talk, so I apologize for that. This is the commits from 2016 till today on the Typesense repository. So you can see all those small things that when I was just working on my nights and weekends. You can see a very clear shift to see when I started working on it like full time or started taking it seriously. So for the first 4 years, right, essentially it was just 1 year of work because we did that math, 20% of your work here. So like, what can you do in 1 year of work? We saw the list of things that I needed to learn. I needed to learn how to build a distributed system. I needed to learn how to do query parsing. I needed to learn how to do all those data structures, right? So can you do all of that in just 1 year of compressed work, which is essentially like spread over 5 years, right? It turns out you can do a lot, right? And this kind of struck me when somewhere around 2018 is when it struck me. I never really thought of this. I was just like a horse with a hooded horse just going on a straight line, just doing my 1 hour per day thing. So somewhere around late 2017 and 2019 is when it struck me, hey, this is starting to fall in place. So 2015, I was like prototyping all these data structures, benchmarking them. Then in 2016, I started building the bottom engine, that the engine for actually doing the searching and the filtering and the sorting and so on. And then once that was ready, you still need to expose it to the outside world through some form of API. So in 2017, C++ was a language of choice for me, and there was no web framework available for C++. There were web servers, but there were no web frameworks. And some part of 2017, I was thinking, I was writing all this HTTP API layer, the framework, and I briefly thought, should I just open source this as a C++ HTTP framework rather than a C++ HTTP search engine because of all the work that went into it. So yeah, I continued working on it through 2017, 2018. Once I had a server and stuff running, we needed to have client libraries. Like, let's say you want to consume the service from Python or Java. So building all those client libraries. So it's just me just working every day. And at some point by 2017-18, in 2018, once we had some client libraries and the service, the product was functioning, that's when I open sourced it. And I was very, very afraid because I have never written production grade C++ before I started working on this. So I was like, I was really, really afraid to open source it because somebody is going to create a zero-day defect saying that, hey, this is how I can take over your server using this HTTP curl or something like that. So, but it went well, thankfully. Nothing of that sort happened. So yeah, that's after that, things became drastically easier. After 2019 onwards, a good friend of mine joined as a co-founder. We started working on the like monetization, how you can like offer like hosted search on using the open source product and so on. So things became much easier, but the first 4 years was just pure slog. Right, so 2023, as I said, we are serving about 1.5 billion requests on our search platform. I do not know how many requests people do outside of that. I was just talking to I was doing a talk in a community, and someone said that, hey, we are doing 500 million searches a month open source. We are not using Typesense Cloud, but we are doing 500 million a month. So I'm sure we should be 8 to 10 billion at least total requests being served by Typesense. We don't track that, but yeah, and we are 100% bootstrap. We didn't raise any money. We didn't raise any external capital. So it turns out that you can do a lot by just just going bottom up rather than top down, right? Instead of doing all those big planning, you just boil down what you have to do to a very bare bone essence. You can get a lot done. But there's also a method to the madness, right? There are some nuances. I'm not saying that if you went and pushed against a wall for an hour every day, the wall is going to move. That's not what it is. There are obviously things that will be totally way out of your league. So there are some nuances. So let's talk about that as well, right? So one thing that, if you want to use this kind of strategy, you have like a big goal, but you want to like just focus on the bottom up way of building that. One of the things that works really well for this kind of strategy is picking an evergreen target, right? Pick a target that is time invariant. That is nobody, if you do it 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, right? And search was one such field, because even in 2015, I knew that we were starting to produce a lot of information that's not going to stop, and people are always going to be able to want to index them and make it searchable. So it's not a case where I'm investing my time in a particular goal that will be like diminishing in return as the time goes on, right? So that was not the case. So picking an evergreen target is really important. And also picking a large market. Let's say you're like learning a new language, you want to be good at a particular framework or a tech stack, pick something that's large, because I always think of luck. When you have to be lucky a lot in life, but the larger surface area that you pick, sometimes it makes luck easier to get attached to you, right? So think of it that way. Pick large markets so that you get large opportunities. And even if other people have the same crazy idea as you and are doing the same thing, in a large market, you can have large number of competitors without eating each other off. Sometimes you just on many occasions you will realize that you have this coding block or a writer block. This is a really great quote. Someone asked William Stafford, he had a peculiar way of writing. He just writes every day, very similar to what I did of coding every day, right? And someone asked him, why don't you get writer's block? How can you do this? Then he said that, I just lower my standards and keep writing. So sometimes we are not able to move past something. Sometimes we are not able to complete a task simply because the task that we are kind of doing doesn't meet our own internal expectations, right? So you write a letter, you don't like it, you tear it away and throw it, and you write it again, and you're writing an essay or writing an email. You will be doing this a few times sometimes. But sometimes if you just allow yourself to be lousy or allow yourself to be sloppy, right? It's okay. You give yourself permission to be a little lazy and just lower your standard a bit so that you can continue progressing. That's one thing that really helped me, because many of the data structures that I spoke about, I would have rewritten it 3 or 4 times over the last 5 years. And if I had waited to do that perfect version on day 1, my project would have never moved. And by choosing to be lazy, choosing to be sloppy, by having a V1 of the data structure so I could move forward, that iterative process really helped come up with better designs and for me to keep moving. And we never have deadlines. Even as a company, we have about 6 to 7 engineers working. Now it's no longer just a solo show. And we still don't have any deadlines, right? Because I firmly believe that if everyone in your team is motivated and we all are, right? That's why we are here to learn new things. And you are already doing your best. Sometimes, especially on personal endeavors, you don't really need to have deadlines because you're trying your best. Just by putting some deadline out there might not magically make you do things better. In fact, it might create pressure for you to get burnt out and so on. So I've never had deadlines. Even in our company, we never have deadlines. Sometimes customers will ask us, hey, can you at least give us like a 3-week or a 3-month or some kind of weekly or monthly time frame? And we usually tell them it's done when it is done. We will update the GitHub ticket when it's done. You can sign up for notification. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to walk away from money when somebody tells you, we will sign the contract if you ship this feature in the next month. But we have done that repeatedly over and over again, because there is a cost associated with every such decision that you take, every such deadline and pressure that you create. There is an alternative option of not doing that, and this might or might not work for everyone, but this has worked for us. Finally, on any new endeavor that you take, right? This is how your curvature will likely look like. I will show you the full graph in the next slide. But right when you start with that a new endeavor, you're all like flushed with adrenaline. You're like all excited and motivated. But very soon, you will have this thing called the dip. This is a great book by Seth Godin. It talks about how to stick and when to quit when you're on a dip. This is true for anything. Like, let's say any of you have learned a musical instrument, you will know that, hey, you will be first, you will watch someone play a particular instrument, you'll feel like it's so great, and you start learning, and then a few months later you can see that you're not making the same noises that you saw that other musician make, and you will end up in a dip like this, right? And what do you do in that? So with any endeavor, this is how you're going to this is what your path is going to be, right? You're going to have initial excitement, and then as soon as your novelty declines, you will end up in this trough of sorrow, which is basically a very plateaued phase where you have to do a lot, but you're not seeing any movement or progress. And at that point, you will either choose to give up and crash, or if you persist through it, you will have some wiggles or falls, and then you will have some success, and then finally you will have the upside, right? So this is typically what most of us, when we start on like large, ambitious projects, will go through. And knowing upfront that initial excitement is going to decline, and you're going to go through this trough of sorrow, kind of will prepare you for the journey, right? So almost at the end of the talk. So if you're looking to do this, pick like a really large, ambitious, hairy goal, and you want to have a go at it. You can. What worked for me, I'm not going to generalize it as an advice, but what worked for me was picking an evergreen goal and having no deadlines, but showing up every day and just seeing the unreasonable effectiveness of showing up every day as things fall in place. Thank you.